want to welcome you to our event this afternoon. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We have a couple of sign-up sheets back there if you're in one of the econ classes or in business statistics. Make sure you sign up before you leave. Also, we're going to have an opportunity for Q&A, and I'm not sure, how do you want to handle that? As you go or toward the end, or? Okay, we'll have Q&A towards the end, and we are...
Unless you're really mad, you can just throw a question at me. If I've insulted you, so just throw it out there.
So if you do have a question, when we get to that point, let me know. I'll bring the microphone to you, okay? Because we actually have we're streaming this to some of our alumni, and they'd like to hear the questions as well as the answers. So when we get there, I'll come running with a microphone. So Dan Bartlett is Executive Vice President of Corporate Affairs for Walmart. He is responsible for government relations and public policy, corporate communications, philanthropy, and the company's social responsibility and sustainability initiatives. Before joining Walmart, Dan was President and Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. Division of Hill & Knowlton Strategies, where he served as a strategic advisor to business leaders representing key sectors of the American and global economy. Prior to Hill & Knowlton Strategies, Dan served as President and CEO of Public Strategies Incorporated. Previously, he served in several high-ranking positions at the White House, completing his service as counselor to George W. Bush in July of 2007. As one of President Bush's most trusted advisors, he was responsible for all aspects of communications for the President and his administration, including the White House Press Office, speech writing, and the Office of Communications. Dan also played key roles in George W. Bush's presidential and Texas gubernatorial campaigns. Dan is a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin and serves on the advisory board of UT Austin's College of Communication. He is also an adjunct faculty member at the University of Texas LBJ School of Public Affairs and a fellow of the school's Center for Politics and Government. Help me to welcome Dan Bartlett.
Thank you, Dean. Appreciate it. Well, I appreciate the introduction. I thought I would spend a little bit of time talking a little bit about my background. Obviously, it's kind of an interesting background as a recovering political hack who found my way out of politics and into the private sector, first working at a consulting firm, and then ultimately here nearby here at Walmart. And it's interesting because I tell people a lot of times Walmart in some respects feels like my second stint in government because it's kind of like a country in of its own. We have 2.6 million employees in 28 countries around the world. We just this past year eclipsed $500 billion in revenue, which would make us right around the 21st largest country in the world. So in a lot of the dynamics internally as you try to help manage an organization of that size is not too dissimilar from the same kind of challenges you have trying to manage government. And so it's been fascinating, and this June will be 5 years since I've been at Walmart and serving on the management team. I'll get into a little bit more about, I have a very generic title called Corporate Affairs, Head of Corporate Affairs, but essentially what that means is I help globally manage Walmart's reputation. And as you can probably imagine, that could be kind of complex. We have over 10,000 stores around the world. Just here in the United States, we have 140 million transactions a week. So and I'm sure each of you hopefully have been one of those. But as you can probably imagine, the sheer humanity of that many people going through our stores, there's always something going on at a Walmart somewhere in the world. But also because of our size and scale, we also play a key role in shaping and influencing public policy, hopefully more times than not for the good. And we also have one of the largest corporate philanthropy foundations in the world, in which we give both in-kind as well as direct contributions over $1 billion a year to help tackle a lot of societal issues. Mainly with us being the largest grocer in the world, we play a key role in alleviating hunger, not only here in the United States, but around the world. So talk a little bit about that. But to back up a little bit, I did start primarily my career in politics. I was I'm sure there's not a lot of Longhorns here in the house, but I was a student at the University of Texas, and it was down there in the capital city in which I got my first exposure to in-state politics. And as I was graduating from the University of Texas, when I got an opportunity to work on George W. Bush's first campaign for governor. And it turns out, so I went to work for him in October of 1993, and I kept working for him all the way to July of 2007. So I was actually the longest continuous serving staffer to the president. And I got to see an enormous amount. I started in a policy role as a kind of a policy assistant doing research on his campaigns, his first campaign for governor, and then ultimately worked in the governor's policy office during his first term as governor. And it was really, as we went into his second term, there was a lot of speculation beginning about whether he had ambition to run for president, which got the attention of a lot of people on the other side of the political aisle who started paying attention to what we were doing in Texas. And his re-election campaign almost became the first round of his presidential campaign. And so I moved back over to the campaign, and I started to morph more into kind of a quasi-communications policy role, in which I was helping defend the governor's, at that time, the governor's record in Texas, as well as talking about what he was going to do in the future. And then that transitioned into working on the presidential campaign. And I was in charge in 2000 of what was called then Director of Rapid Response. And that was essentially, we were running against Al Gore at that time. And any time Al Gore would attack George W. Bush, it was my job to fashion the response to that and help manage a lot of the response during the presidential debates. And then had the honor to work in the White House and serve in the White House in various communications role, ultimately running the entire communications operation. I'm often asked if I miss those days in the White House, and I think back on it. I mean, I was on Air Force One with President Bush on 9/11. We had a shuttle disaster. We had 2 Supreme Court nominations. We had Katrina. We had, obviously, the invasions in Afghanistan and Iraq. We had Vice President Cheney actually shot somebody. That was a long day. I'm often asked if I look older than I am, but it's probably got a lot of gray hair working in the White House. And luckily, I guess you could say, I left the White House just short of the end of his presidency, right? So I did miss the financial crisis of 2008. I watched that from afar. But those experiences, obviously, as somebody, I grew up in a small rural town in Texas, in northeast Texas, and literally for the first year, I mean, I felt like Forrest Gump. I was the guy in the picture who wasn't supposed to be there. Have you seen those photos? It's like pinch yourself moments as you're experiencing that for the first time. And then, you know, it was only 9 months into the presidency, when 9/11 hit, and the whole world changed. And as you could probably imagine, working in the White House and the government was a pretty surreal experience to be there during that time. And I'm happy to talk more about that, or if people have questions about that experience or the subsequent experiences. But I got a chance to travel to over 38 countries with the president. I got to sit in on some incredible meetings, 3 or 4 meetings with President Putin, with leaders of China, Middle East peace process. It was really it was kind of like an open book history test that you sat there and got to experience all this real time. The thing my wife was probably the most jealous about is I actually spent 3 nights in Buckingham Palace, which was really cool. So it's those kind of incredible experiences you have doing that. And at the same time, I had twins while I was in the White House, and then when our third boy, we have 4 boys, by the time my third boy came around, and my wife was kind of like, it's time to maybe start thinking about paying bills and those things. And so, because the average stay for a West Wing senior staffer, well, I think the average probably come down over this term because there's a lot of turnover in the current Trump administration. But typically, it's about 2.3 years that a senior staffer lasts in a West Wing, and like I said, I think that number's coming down a bit. And really, it's fascinating having served there to watch a very unconventional presidency unfold. In the way it's not only changing the way policies made, but also how communications is done. Interesting for me, I'm going to date myself, when we came into, if you think about it this way, when Ronald Reagan ran for re-election in 1984, 82% of the American people got their news from 3 sources: ABC, CBS, and NBC. By the time we got there, in 2000, that number had dropped to 42%, and that number today sits at about 19%. So there's been this massive proliferation of sources of information. And one of the challenges, if you think about it on face value, you would say the more access we have to information, the better the discourse and civil discourse should be, because more people will have more information to educate themselves about the issues of the day and then make better informed decisions. I don't think it's quite worked out that way. I think it's actually, I talk a lot about the permanent state of partisan politics in our country, and there's 2 real main drivers of that partisanship. I call it systemic partisanship. One is redistricting, if those who are familiar with that. Redistricting is the way in which we draw our congressional maps in each state, and a process that's done every 10 years based on the census, and those districts get written in a way that are favorable to whoever holds the power in that respective state legislature. And so they make sure that incumbents get reelected. And so you go from a situation where 20, 30 years ago, when Congress came up for re-election, at least half, if not 3/4 of the seats would be contested seats, to now where less than 30 seats out of the 435 seats are actually contested. So you have a situation where a member of Congress who's running is more worried about a primary opponent than they are a general election opponent. And so if both parties are waking up every day worried about either their extreme flanking to the right if you're conservative or to the left if you're a liberal, there's no real incentive to compromise. In fact, you'll actually get punished if you try to compromise on policies. And so that's a political conundrum that members of Congress face every single day. And then if you layer on top of that the fact that, as I was talking about, this technology has just made this massive proliferation of news and information, and I guess now fake news. And that essentially what we've done is we've made it easier to find information that actually reinforces your views than questions your views. We all have our favorite places to go to get information, our favorite bloggers or our favorite sources of information, and we rush to that, or we have it served up to us first thing in the morning, so our talking points are almost reinforced right out of the gate. And so we get our position hardened almost right out of the gate. So if you have that dynamic going on at the same time that you have this other issue going on with the way members of Congress get elected, that's a pretty tough thing to overcome. And when you hear about people wanting us to change the way Washington works and change the partisanship, the real mechanics of it, I think, are actually kind of broken. And that's something that I wish I had a more optimistic outlook about how to fix that, but it's a real challenge that if I think, because we'll also always hear is like, well, if we just had the right leader, if so-and-so would have just done this, or if so-and-so would have just said that. And I think there's probably enough criticism for the president I worked for, or the current one, or others on the other side, where they could have done better as far as being leaders. But I still think it wouldn't have addressed or fixed some of these more fundamental systemic issues we're facing. And so my experience there was an incredible one. It does look a lot better in the rearview mirror. I don't miss it per se. What the good thing is my job now is I still am very much involved in government and politics, because of we're the largest private sector employer here in the United States and around the world. And so we have a lot of equities in what happens in Washington and what happens in capitals around the world. So my teams around the world spend a lot of time focused on that. And as I said, in large part, my team's responsibility is to protect and strengthen Walmart's reputation. And those of you who might be marketing students or interested in marketing and brands and things like that, I wanted to describe a little bit of, there's a difference between brand and reputation. And to try to put it in simple terms, if you think about a company's brand, inside the 4 walls of your company, you can kind of control what your brand is going to be. You can decide what you're going to sell. You can decide at what price you're going to sell it. You can decide what type of customer experience you're going to have. All those things are in your control, how much money you want to invest in that, how much emphasis you want to put on each of those attributes that people kind of decide or weigh when they're going to engage with a brand. everybody outside the four walls of your company rendering judgment on you is your reputation. Now, your reputation can be influenced by the brand experience. You could be mad if you went to the super center down the street here and they didn't have what you wanted, or you waited too long, or the parking lot was full or dirty. Those things influence you. So the brand has an influence on your reputation. But you also might be influenced by if you think whether Walmart or another company is a good actor, a good corporate citizen, whether they, when there's times like Katrina or when we had the massive flooding in Houston, in which Walmart stepped up and provided over $50 million in contributions to help those who are impacted by the floods in Houston or the hurricanes in Florida. Those types of things, or what our position is on sustainability, or what we're doing to provide access and mobility for our own workforce to gain skills to be able to compete in a new economy. All those things can influence what you think about a company, and that forms a company's reputation. And what's interesting for Walmart, and it's not unlike other companies that start really small with a founder and grow really fast, is that 25 years ago or so, or 30 years ago when Sam Walton was still running the company, usually you have what I would call is a narrow definition of your public, who your public is and who you're concerned about. Oftentimes companies think of it narrowly as, if I just focus on my employees and my customers, don't worry about what the New York Times is writing, don't worry about what this interest group is saying, everything will take care of itself. And that's probably right if you're a small company, not relevant, but as Walmart grew in size and became a Fortune 50, Fortune 40, Fortune 30, Fortune 10, and now Fortune 1, you have a bigger responsibility and you have more people who are placing expectations on you. We get at Walmart 3 times as much news coverage of all of our competitors combined. So everybody's focused, everybody's looking at what Walmart does or doesn't do, and you have to start thinking about that more thoughtfully and engage with not only people who are supportive of you, but critics of yours to help shape that reputation in a sense. So my team spend quite a bit of time thinking about engaging who are all those stakeholders, either when it comes to issues, like I said, that impacts our workforce, issues that impacts the security of our country, like cybersecurity, as we were talking about earlier, issues around, like I said, the nation's food supply, as we're the largest grocer, as I said, in the world. All these issues in which not only Walmart, but Walmart's supply chain has a massive impact on. Our voice at the table is really important, and that helps, again, shape our reputation. All this is going on at a time when I think it's safe to say that the way people shop is radically changing. You probably heard of this thing called Amazon. Hopefully not too much. But it's interesting is Amazon has been, just like Walmart was originally in bricks and mortar, Amazon has been a major disruptor in the way in which retail is taking place. And what's fascinating for Walmart is that Walmart has always been in a position of changing itself. I mean, there's a saying when we're in big Walmart meetings is like, it's one thing that you can count on at Walmart is that things will, and everybody will say, change. They'll just say it back to you. Because Sam Walton was always saying, what can we do to stay ahead of the competition? And ironically, one of the big, I mean, it sounds so obvious today, but back in 1989, 1990, when Walmart was deciding whether it was going to get into the food business, this was highly controversial inside of Walmart. There were people at Walmart who thought this was going to be the death of the company. They thought it was going to change the mix of how our profitability is, that it was, we're not a grocer, we're not these things, this is going to be crazy. You look back on it now, and if we had not got into the food business, we probably find ourselves pretty similarly to where Kmart or other traditional bricks and mortar general merchandise retailers find themselves. And so the fact that we've got into health and wellness and pharmacy, and the fact that we're in the food business and those things actually is a key reason why we're as strong as we are today. Having said that, we are in a time in which we are radically changing ourselves from within. We are trying to be more of a digital company. We are trying, as we build out an e-commerce business, our e-commerce business is the second most trafficked e-commerce business in the country, and it's one of the larger ones in the world, in which we are engaging in building e-commerce platforms, not just here, but in Latin America as well as in China, Canada, and Mexico. So it's something in which we found ourselves to have to change ourselves unless we want to be, just like others, be taken out by our competition. And for us, when I think about it, people kind of think about this race, and you think about, okay, all of y'all at one point still like to go in and touch something and feel something. There's going to be some things you're going to want to buy physically. There's a lot of things in shopping that's just a pain in the neck, and you just don't want to deal with it. Like I said, my wife, we have 4 young boys. If my wife's got all the boys in the car and all that, the last thing she wants to do is go grocery shopping and have to spend an hour in a super center trying to do that weekly stock up trip. If Walmart now can have you order it on an iPhone and pick an hour in which they can drive just in the parking lot, not ever get out of the car, and somebody from Walmart for free will come out and put all your groceries in your car, that's life-changing for my wife. And we have more distribution points. 90% of the U.S. population is within 10 miles of a Walmart. That is an unbelievable advantage for a company like us. And so as we see like Amazon get into the business of bricks and mortar, they bought Whole Foods, for example, and Whole Foods has about 400 stores, and we have about 5,000 here. Our reach for what is called, and one of the hardest parts about e-commerce is what's called last mile delivery. That last, as we see UPS trucks and FedEx trucks constantly going up and down streets, the economics of last mile delivery are awful. It's just, there's not an economical way, even with a membership like a Prime member and those things, does the math really work out. So if we can help change the economics of last mile delivery by just making it easy to avoid it altogether, because you can just slip through a super center parking lot, never have to get out, and we're now averaging about 5.2 minutes that we'll have somebody who hits the property, our parking lot, gets the food, put in their car, their groceries, and off. That's the average right now. We're in over 1,000 stores right now. That's pretty convenient. And the other thing about it, and what you're finding out, is when you start thinking about delivery of food, it's one thing to buy a book or a pair of shoes that you don't mind hanging out on your front porch for a couple hours. You don't want your milk or your eggs or your bread or those things hanging out on your front porch for a while. And so as Amazon and other competitors try to get into the food delivery business, it's a lot more difficult because the supply chain for cold storage, for delivery, and those things is real hard. And so having that capability of having stores so close to make it convenient, and also it's kind of that cable man syndrome. It's like you hate waiting around for the cable man who says they're going to come sometime between 1 and 5, and you're just sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting. That part doesn't feel very convenient either. So the other parts of it is technology is going to make it more seamless for how you shop. Sometimes, like I said, you're going to want to shop online. Sometimes you want to go in the store. Sometimes you're going to want a blended experience where you can pick up all the things there, but then run in and get the produce you want. And it's basically what technology is doing is it's taking all the pain points. If you don't like waiting in line, we're now doing scan and go in our Sam's Clubs, and we're going to have them in Walmart soon, where you just go to the aisle, you scan the deal, put it in your bag, and you never go through a cashier, a checkout. And so some people like that, some people don't. So we're going to have these options for everyone. And as I think about it, and people, there's a lot of optimism about Amazon's future, and you think about it in the context of Walmart. And if you think about on one end of the spectrum, pure bricks and mortar, let's say on this side of the spectrum, and then pure online being on this side of the spectrum, and right in the middle is actually the sweet spot to where you kind of have both capabilities. They call it omni shopping. You kind of think about it as like, okay, if it's a race to the middle, what side of that spectrum would you want to start on? And our argument is, I would rather have had the 30 years of building a physical base of stores and supply chain, and then have to just add the digital capabilities to do e-commerce, versus just building a startup of e-commerce capabilities, then contemplating, oh my gosh, I got to go build or acquire or integrate a bunch of physical stores or supply chain. So while Amazon has got a lead on us on the digital capabilities, we think the lead we have on the physical capabilities is going to far put us in advantage over the long haul for that race to the middle. And that's really the bet right now is, amongst others and us, what companies, what retail companies can win that race to the middle and succeed. And we feel good about our position because, like I said, we have that physical infrastructure. But the other critical point, and one of the things that we're blessed with at Walmart, and one of the challenges if you're a business major here, and there's a lot of conversation around long-termism versus short-termism. Do you want companies who are making decisions that are in the long-term best interests of society, of their shareholders and their customers, but they feel the pressure, the financial pressure of quarterly results and making short-term decisions for the financial performance of the company? It's a tension that afflicts boardrooms and CEOs all across the country. Is, do I invest for the long haul, or do I give money back to our shareholders to get the share price of the company up? And that's a real challenge, and that's why you have activist investors who invest and try to unseat board members and have proxy battles. And in our situation, we are pretty unique. We are a publicly traded company, but we have a majority owner of our company, and that is the Walton family, who owns 51% of our company, which puts us in an interesting situation in which we are, and they have a direction that they believe they want us to be here 50 years from now, not just 10 years from now. Because I could tell you right now, Walmart would be making different decisions today if we were looking at this in the short term. We wouldn't be making all the investments in e-commerce and technology like we are. We wouldn't be making all the investment to make us really a digitally enterprise. We would, it's called ride the slide. We could sweat the assets where we could make those physical stores, extend the life of them for a pretty good while, and all the executives that are there right now would do just fine. And I'm sure we could actually, make the stock perform in a certain way over the short term. But what would be the legacy? What would we leave for the next generation of shoppers, of next generation of associates and employees at the company? It would be taking the wrong point of view. And that's something that companies struggle with all the time, about that long-term desire with short-term performance. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any short-term accountability. There has to be, and it's more art than science about what's the right balance. And a lot of our board meetings with our board of directors is about that very topic. What are realistic expectations of financial performance in the short term, while also making sure you're doing the right things to position the company for the long term? And it's that tension that has the interest of, like I said, of shareholders, and we have other shareholders as well. Hopefully some of y'all in here might be a shareholder of Walmart. And so you want to make sure you're getting a good investment along the way. And so that, like I said, that's that tension. And as a company that has been viewed as a very stable, dependable, return on investment type company, who in the last couple of years now is saying, we're going to take some of those profits we've made and we're going to invest them to the future instead of just returning them to shareholders, doesn't make everybody happy, to be honest. A lot of people say, well, I'd rather that be famous. So it's that type of friction or conflict that happens in companies, and it's not, like I said, but we're a little bit different, like I said, because we do have a majority owner that thinks about it a little bit differently. Lastly, I come back to the point is that one of the things we're really focused on, that I'm really proud about, is really at a time when there's all this talk about technology and algorithms and data privacy, we are fundamentally still a people business. Like I said, we are the largest private sector employer in the country. Over the last couple of years, we've made, despite the fact that the minimum wage laws in our country have not moved, we've pushed the minimum wage increases in our own company to $11 an hour. We've created 200 academies across the country that's already trained 250,000 of our entry-level associates to give them skills that not only make them more likely to get promotions within Walmart, but also allow them to maybe get skills that would help them succeed outside of Walmart too. And we're in talks to partnering with other entities that could help us give not only one of the big issues, a lot of our associates need ESL training. English is not their first language, and so we're providing opportunities for them to learn English. We are making sure that we will pay for and make sure they got either a high school education, a GED, but we're also setting up scholarships so they can pursue higher education as well. Because ultimately, we are still of the mind that the most successful companies are going to be the companies that are aligned with their own employees. And I see now, and one of the things that is kind of challenging the role that I'm in, there's a lot of paralysis in government around particularly tackling issues that the public is frustrated about, is we're finding, particularly in the last 2 years, 3 years, our own employees want to be aligned with a company that shares their values, and there's more pressure on us to speak out on issues and to take positions on issues, which is not comfortable for companies. We prefer to wake up every day and just do our day jobs and just sell stuff. But it's just not that simple anymore, because increasingly we find it when we're recruiting young people and others, they want their job to be more, in their profession where they go pursue a career, to be more than just a transactional relationship in which they just come, do their time and go home and get a paycheck. They want to make sure that they're aligned with the companies whose values are aligned. But when you do that at a company that is as diverse as not only our associates are, we're America. We have 1.3 million employees in the United States. You got every political affiliation, you've got every culture, you've got every kind of background you can imagine. And then you layer on top of that, 60% of the US population goes through our stores in any given month. And so we have a massively diverse customer base as well. And so for us to put our finger on the and take political positions, for example, that may be construed as on one side or the other, can be very disastrous for us, economically. If we were to completely make conservatives mad on one issue, or completely make liberals mad on another issue, or whatever it may be, we have to try to navigate those complexities. And so what we try to do is, and there's no formula, I wish there was, that would tell you which ones to talk about and which ones not. But what you try to do is, every company has a core set of values, and respect the individual is one of our core set of values. And as we look at policies and things, and if we say this is not being respectful of the individual, this is not how we would treat our own associates, we're finding ourselves having to speak out more often. And so far that's been okay, but like I said, we go in with that with eyes wide open, because in this kind of environment in which how quickly people can react and overreact at times, not always based on a full set of information. And now we have a question about the integrity of information. What is real and what is not? We've been, on more than one occasion, we've had now YouTube videos and others that have been fabricated, that have happened in our store, to try to ignite a social reaction and create a social media storm around misgrievances in our stores. And but once that thing gets out, it's hard to get the genie back in the bottle, and we found that to be very difficult. And so companies are, I will be very on edge about how to operate in a world in which information is increasingly distrusted, and the ability to trust brands and companies for what they stand for and what they say. Because when you have institutions that are coming under assault, like our government institutions and some societal institutions, trust levels for all major institutions, whether they be the government or key social ones or the Supreme Court, you name it, all of them are at record lows right now. And so if you have a very untrustworthy environment, that's a difficult environment to operate in as like I said, the largest private sector employer. And so these are some of the tricky issues that companies like Walmart, and particularly my team at Walmart, try to stay on top of and anticipate as much as possible, and help make sure that the company's making the right decisions in that regard. So it's never a dull moment, and that's kind of a broad landscape of what's going on at Walmart now, and a little bit about my background. And it might be easiest just to open it up to questions, if that sounds right, Dean.
Question. Dr. J. Bruce.
Leave it to the faculty.
Thanks so much. I'm just a philosopher, so I don't even know. This will be a good question. But are there particular challenges that you face in battling with e-commerce places like Amazon, because the customer, in some sense, determines most of the salient features of the interaction, whereas if I go to a brick and mortar Walmart store, then the interaction that I have is largely determined by Walmart. So if I'm looking, if my iPhone screen is broken and I'm looking at the Amazon site, I don't blame Amazon for the broken screen. But if I, drive my car and park, if I drive my car and park in a Walmart parking lot, then everything that I look at, I can blame Walmart for, and probably if something's really nice, I don't notice it as much. Does this create peculiar challenges in terms of how shoppers perceive you?
That's a fair question. I would accept half of that as being true in the sense that there is a difference that, there's just kind of a brain thing when you walk into a physical store and say, you own all this, and then online, there's a little bit more liberty for you to think, well, that's, I know I'm just dealing with a platform here. I think in the case, I got to give a lot of credit to Amazon. They've earned that because of the experience they've created on their site. They've taken so much, they've made it so easy. First thing they've done is they've just got everything. The number of SKUs of the assortment they have, and they own all, very little of that is first party. It's these third parties that just kind of rent space on their website. But everything from their return policies to, think about it, they get some of the highest customer service feedback out of all brands. And has anybody ever spoken to anybody at Amazon? Not very often, though. It's a lot of it is done. If you got a real problem, it's usually with a third-party item that you're trying to return. But for the most part, all your experience is digital, and it's usually pretty good. And Walmart, for example, is building. We have, I would say that Amazon has over 300 million items that they offer to their customers. We're more in the 75 million range. So we don't have to get all the way to 300 million, but we have to get further down the path. So when because if you don't own search, if you think about it, there's two things you think about when you think of search, I bet, Google and Amazon. If you don't find them there, you're not going to find it. And so the consideration set has to broaden. We have to make people think about, well, if I want something, I can find it on Walmart.com as easily as I can find it on Amazon.com, and that's not the case right now. And so I think there's definitely a little more arm's length, but it'll be interesting as they get into the physical retail business with Whole Foods, and if they do more of that, how much that might change as well. It's a good question, though. Yes, sir.
Now, I heard you talk about the implementation of a technology similar to Amazon's new just like take it and go in the store using scanners and sensors without checkout. Is this going to be Walmart's novel patented technology, or are you going to be using server hosting from Amazon and implementing their technology?
We will not be doing server. We won't be using AWS or anything. That's
okay. Okay.
No. And so Amazon has tested. They have one, and they're about to open a new store called Amazon Go in Seattle, and it's all facial recognition. Yeah. You don't even scan, and it's pretty free. I've been there. It's kind of freaky. You literally just pick the item up and put it in your bag, and you can walk out, and you can put it back and put it in. I tried everything to try to get to see if I was going to test them. And it works quite well. Now it's a very small. It's probably maybe just this front area here, and there's very limited items in which you can purchase. Scan and Go is a little different. You have an app that you open up, and you do the barcode on the barcode, and then if you've been to a Sam's Club or a Costco, there's somebody standing out there. They have their own code, and they just marry the two together, and it checks it like automatically. So there's one piece of interface, but it's ultimately probably heading to a frictionless, and each company, us, and then we'll probably have our own patented approach to doing that. But not everybody's going to want that. And so with food, it's even tougher because if you have weighted products, and then if you have prohibited products like alcohol, tobacco, firearms, things like that, you don't want to scan and go a shotgun. Yeah. some parts of the country maybe, but not. So there's those types of complications that come with it, but it's definitely headed in that direction.
What does the rollout plan look for that timeline-wise?
Well, I can't get into that. We were piloting it, so it's very early stages.
Okay.
Time for you to graduate and come help.
In your opinion, what do you see as the future of business as tied with social policy?
Yeah. It's interesting is that several years ago, probably, when about 5-6 years ago when I was joining Walmart, you heard a lot about corporate responsibility, and it was almost viewed as kind of a separate agenda item initiative that kind of lives outside the business, that helped kind of write reports about the company, made the company look and feel better. And now you're moving into a mindset that's more about what's called shared value, which is instead of thinking that a business can try to perform financially and then do well enough to also pay for societal initiatives, that the two don't have to be in tension, that we call it double bottom line. It could be good for the bottom line of the company, but also good for society. And where Walmart learned that most was probably in our journey on sustainability. And we learned as we started taking waste out of our supply chain, and we started becoming on our path to 100% renewable and those things, and 100% zero waste landfill, we're at 79%, that actually makes us more efficient, which allows for us to reinvest that efficiencies in lowering prices for customers, that it's a cycle that can benefit as well, but also because of this issue of trust. And fundamentally, if communities in which you operate in or customers who you do business with don't trust you, they're going to take their business elsewhere. And you're now seeing increasingly investors now making a requirement. They're called ESG metrics that they follow, in which they're grading companies on these issues of shared value as much as they're grading your quarterly performance on profit or revenue or EPS or those things. So just in the short period of time I've been at Walmart, there's been a massive transformation of how that's being viewed. And I think in companies all across the world, people are having to take it much more seriously and dealing with it, like I said, not as a one-off, like sits outside the business, but is kind of more fundamental to the business itself. And I think that's only going to increase in time because of external pressures, but as I stated earlier, I think also because of internal pressures. I think employees are increasingly wanting that of their companies as well. Yes, sir.
Early on in your speech, you mentioned how people are essentially coming out of the gate with a bias because they're reading information that they agree with.
Yeah.
Do you think there's an issue currently when media platforms or information platforms curate the experience to just show information that someone would agree with? And if so, what are some things that Walmart can do to kind of either stand against that or help it in any way?
Yeah, it's one of the toughest things because we don't have time to do self-curation, either of information or of products. There is something to be said for the ability to, if you allow for it, and this is obviously the issue in which a certain media platform called Facebook is finding themselves engulfed in, which is when do they take too much of that information and share it with too many entities that can over-curate that experience. And so it's not going to be one extreme or the other. It's going to be somewhere in the middle, I think, in which you're going to want some help. And that's what I say. It's part of kind of where technology can be so favorable, because it can help you navigate finding the right information about a product or right information about an issue. But fundamentally, though, the premise has to be is the platform has to be one in which you have trust in. And these companies that lose that trust, it could be irretrievable. It'll be interesting to see, and how you handle it, and how you handle the situation is obviously Facebook is not only getting criticized for the practices, but they're also getting criticized a little bit for how slow the response has been to those practices, which is a real challenge. And knowing people there and knowing how that it caught them a bit. They'd had other issues in the past that didn't really blow up the way this one did. It was almost a perfect storm of information. So we are looking at constantly what are some things around trust and transparency that we can do and be very explicit with our customers, and then also advocate with government to say we're willing to hold ourselves up to this standard and expectations to make sure we never come close to violating that trust. But I think that's, I mean, I hate to put it in commercial terms, but it'll be a key differentiator for brands. Those who can earn the trust that they will do right with your information, boy, that's a real advantage. And so, unfortunately, I think this is still there. We're going to probably still have a few more bad experiences before we have the good, but I think it'll end up in the right place.
Okay, I have kind of a two-part question, both of which pertain to applications of blockchain and Walmart's relationship to it.
Wow, you're going to test my subject matter expertise here. Blockchain, okay.
First is with cryptocurrency and payment processing systems. Does Walmart have any plans or what's Walmart's future relationship going to look like to those alternate payment methods with these new cryptocurrencies coming out?
Hard for me to say that we're going to be a leader in cryptocurrency. We're following it closely. What's interesting is we still have, here in the U.S., over 20% of our customers still just operate in cash, much less credit cards or others. So we still have a massive cash business still that we deal with on a weekly basis. We are doing work with blockchain. We're partnering with IBM on blockchain around our food supply chain, and using blockchain to make sure that that we have trust in sources of information where we're getting the goods that we are producing and providing to our customers. So blockchain, and we're doing that in China as well. And so it's a key issue we're going to build. But as far as taking it to the level of I don't know that Walmart's going to launch its own cryptocurrency anytime soon, but we are looking at ways in which we can make it easy for people to do. But the problem is the closer we get into that, if we start looking more and more like a bank, that brings in a lot of regulatory scrutiny as well.
Will you elaborate on the supply side aspect of it and using blockchain? Because that was my second question was, is there going to be, for example, you mentioned China on the supply side logistics, they use VChain. A lot of the partnerships are with the VChain Foundation. Yeah. And then also you said IBM is managing some of this, and with that's built on top of the Stellar blockchain or XLM. So what do you foresee a partnership with IBM's blockchain or?
So right now it's just a pilot project. We're working them particularly on food safety in the supply chain and how you can use blockchain to make sure that the food supply we're getting, because outside of air pollution in China, the second big domestic issue is quality of food safety. And so if we can use new technology like blockchain to help bring trust and transparency to the supply chain to make sure that we have safe food is something we're looking at. But my expertise is going to stop right there as far as I don't know what platforms are those things, but I can get you that information. Thanks.
Regarding the communications aspect of your role, when you have a directive or a policy pronouncement or something you need to issue to the world at large from Bentonville, do you make an effort to tailor that considering the values and cultural components of those 28 countries in which you operate? Right. Or do you just shoot it mainly to the American frame of mind and trust your partners in those areas to sort of translate that locally, or something in between?
It's interesting. Communications 20 years ago was much more compartmentalized. We could have discrete communications with our financial community. We could have discrete communications with our own employees. We could have discrete communications with our U.S. customers that our Chinese or Brazilian customers may not hear. That's all over. It's one public, and everybody's hearing everything. In fact, just organizationally, I used to have a communications team that was divided. I had internal communications people and external communications. I've just made it now just a communications team, and I'm making internal comms people be external comms and external comms be internal, because everybody's hearing everything. Our most effective way to communicate with our associates is through external media channels. We use Instagram and Reddit and Twitter and everything else to talk to our internal associates, and because that's where they are, and that's where they're getting information. They're more likely to read that than they are a corporate email or something that's going to come that way. But we have to be mindful of, and that's one of the things that's interesting with my old boss, George W. Bush, and my new boss, Doug McMillan, is what you learn very quickly as a president or CEO is the whole multiple audience, and you're not just speaking to one audience. I'll never forget President Bush, and this was in the run-up to the war in Iraq, and he had just met with a lot of his with some of the troops, and the media asked him a question that was, he interpreted it as being kind of, is your military up to the task? And he obviously wanted to instinctively show his full unwavering support, and he said, bring them on. And that bring them on statement was interpreted in other parts of the world as being bellicose and being, why is this warmonger ready to go to war? And so it was a hard lesson that President Bush learned. Being communications director for President Bush there's some long days. Actually, I'll never forget one of my favorite, when we were doing a press conference in the East Wing of the White House, and it was, I forgot the issue at this point, but they kind of had one of these two-parters that he got going down a path, and he realized when it was a little late what they were setting a trap, and he kind of just stopped dead in his tracks, and there was like 30 seconds of like dead airtime. This is a national primetime address, and I'm back there just going, say something, just say. Anyway, we get off the stage and we're walking off, and I was like, so what happened there? And he's like, well, Bartlett, I got stuck in a rhetorical cul-de-sac. That's one way of putting it. And like I said, now working with Doug McMillan, it's the same thing. Is he's used to being able just to speak to one audience. Now he has to, like, oh my gosh, if I say something, President Trump may tweet against it. The Chinese may get mad. Doug and I were in a meeting 2-3 Fridays ago in Beijing with the second highest ranking official in China, right in the middle of all these tariffs being laid out, and they're wanting to send a message back to Washington through us. And so this Vice President Wang Qishan was being very explicit about what we want, and then we're like, that's when we come back. We just want to be a retailer, man. We just want to sell shoes, some produce, and they're like putting us in the middle of a U.S.-China trade war. And so it's a whole different world, and everybody's listening. And so it's as I tell my teams and as I recruit, and this goes for, and I would encourage you as students, there are no more one-dimensional issues in the world. It is really important to have a subject matter expertise. You got to be really good at something, but cross-train your brains. You got to expand your capabilities, because companies more than anything else are looking for young talent that are multidimensional in their thinking, that they can look at things from very different angles. And so, like I said, you got to have your calling card. You got to have something that you stand for and something that differentiates. But boy, I wouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. I would really try to, like I said, I always tell my team, cross-train your brain. Learn something new today that you didn't know yesterday. Build a skill set that you didn't think you'd need. You'd be surprised. I mean, the one that frustrates me the most is increasingly people can't write. They don't have to anymore. It's 140 characters, or it's brief, or it's now everything's going to into voice and voice activation. But I'm finding I promise this. Those on my team who are good writers are better at other things too. It's just fascinating how it works. Their critical thinking skills, it's amazing how I see it, that they They just think differently, operate differently. Usually if you're a good writer, you're well read, you're a reader as well, which I find interesting. So I just find that the more you can cross-train the brain, the better you're going to position yourself to be marketable in when you're out looking for a job.
Dan, we're at the 5 o'clock hour, and so we just want to say thank you very much for coming and sharing with us.
It was a real
Help us
honor.
thank Dan.
Thank you.